Yeah, this is Gothic John Wick with an actual message in the film. So, because of that, the fact that it even has a message inherently makes it better than John Wick. I didn't like the message. I didn't agree with the message. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I am your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our co-host reviewing the recent release of the 2024 American Gothic superhero film, The Crow, which is a remake of a 1994 film of the same name. It's got the screenplay by Zach Baylin and William Schneider, and it's directed by Rupert Sanders. So, just looking at this film right off the bat, Avalon, what was your initial thoughts, especially after walking out of that theater on the opening weekend? Was your impression positive? Was it negative? What was your overall feel just seeing this film for the first time?
This movie felt like John Wick meets Batman meets Deadpool. I'm not familiar with the graphic novel that in the comics this is based on, but yeah, this is a very dark world, very dark story. It's interesting, and it actually has some good things going for it. But I also feel like there are certain things that could have handled better, which it didn't. So, but we'll get into that. So,
sure, and you know, I think that there's definitely room for improvement here. But they did some things very well in this film, and they did other things really lacking. This film, by its nature, was intriguing to me right off the bat, right? Looking at a commercial for this film, you see that basically it's this character who cannot die, right? And he's coming back to seek vengeance upon the people who have done wrong to him and to the people he loves. And that's the premise they show you in the commercials for this film. And my thought on that was, okay, if you have a protagonist who cannot die, that means all of the stakes have to be around other surrounding issues. And can you do that well, right? You get some impression of that in things like John Wick or other ones where the protagonist ends up being the one who is causing all the terror in the film. You got this similar impression with this. So I was very curious from a storytelling perspective to see, hey, how well do they do that? Do they make the main character compelling? So I do think that from a analysis perspective, this is a very interesting film. That being said, I did not enjoy this film personally. I think there's good things going for it, and I can see how other people would enjoy this film. And this is a remake, right? There was actually 5 installments, not including a TV show, around this. Yes, including this one that we just watched.
Okay,
so 4 previous ones.
Yeah, no, I know there was 4 before, yeah.
This is the 5th installment, correct. So 5 films around The Crow, the comic series created by James O'Barr. I believe that's his name. Yeah, James O'Barr. And it was produced in 1989, and 5 years later, you had a film. So it had clearly something going for it. Based off of what I've read, it doesn't sound like this film is very accurate to the original designed storyline that we see in the comic series. But it's interesting, right? Because you have like a gothic superhero, right? Or like, you know, the goths have someone to represent their name. There you go. So, you know, I could see how it appeals to that group for sure, because they definitely lean into that super hard in this film, and they do that very well, right? Bill Skarsgård is an amazing actor, and he does very well representing that in this film. There's a lot of good things going for it. I think one of the interesting things to note is that they have, like I said, done 5, and we'll get over this just very, very briefly, but it's very interesting, right, to have this as the background, is you have this character, James O'Barr, or sorry, the creator of this, let me just start back over for you all, okay? James O'Barr, when he first created the 1989 comic book series, it was a form of him having therapy, if you will, dealing with the death of his fiancée at the hands of a drunk driver, right? And that's the inspiration, if you will, that created this dark character from which we have this film and 4 other films previously, a TV show, all of that. So it's a fairly compelling, sad story to go off of. 5 years later, you have that brought into the limelight when the comic series was made into a movie starring Brandon Lee. Now, in that situation, Brandon Lee is the son of Bruce Lee, and he's acting. And in the middle of acting for this film, the armorer who had gone off of work ends up, the person who replaced them was not aware of all the responsibilities in the armory and misloaded changing the gun that was used as a prop in the film, kind of similar to what we've just seen with Rust, right? That kind of situation.
Yeah, Rust situation.
Something similar happened with this, where Brandon Lee actually ends up getting shot and dies because of what happened in the 1994 version of this film. So this actually, caused a stir and had some doubts in regards to the release of such a dark film when the main lead actually died in the production of it. Regardless, what ended up happening is James O'Barr regretted making the comic series and stated that after this incident occurred. But it was still a popular hit, right? The film went out to win, or it didn't win awards, but it ended up getting a lot of accolades from the press. A lot of people really liked it and raked in a lot of money for the time. It was overall a success, and they ended up making films after that. Now, the films after that didn't do as well, right? Some of them were direct-to-video or had a week-long timeout in the theaters before going direct-to-video. So it's that ended up being the legacy from the works of James O'Barr, and it was pretty much dropped from 2005 until 2024, where we've seen the recreation of this in a new light. So that's the background for this film. It's drenched in a lot of sadness, really, right? It was inspired by sad things occurring. The first film was wrought with sad things occurring in the midst of it. And it's really sad, but in some ways, I guess, appropriate, because this film is very dark, very bloody, very gory, to a degree that I would say I've not seen in pretty much any film. Unless you can think of anything else, Avalon. But I don't know that I've seen a film that has as much visible gore and violence that you see exactly how people are being cut or hurt like you do in The Crow.
Yeah, I'm hard pressed to think of a movie that I've seen. At least that I've seen. Obviously, the movies do exist. Maybe it's been a while. Maybe Deadpool, like the original like one of the Deadpool movies, maybe. But I don't know. Was it really that violent as this? And maybe even one of the John Wick movies, because I've seen I know you've only seen the first one. I've seen the 3, and I'm wondering if the second or third one was worse than this. But I don't know. But this is definitely ranks up there as far as violent movies. I mean, you and I are not fans of uber violent movies.
I'm pretty open about the fact that as much as I enjoy a good film, right, I'm not great with blood, and I will watch a film with a lot of blood, but I might close my eyes. That's just how it goes. It's not a deterrence for me. It's just something I avoid personally. So I don't think that necessarily affected my rating of the film, right?
Oh, of course.
But it is important to be aware that this is a very dark, very gory film, and you get that right off the bat in this film. So when you said, "Oh, this reminded me of John Wick," combined with this, combined with that, I was like, yeah, this is Gothic John Wick with an actual message in the film. So because of that, the fact that it even has a message inherently makes it better than John Wick. I didn't like the message. I didn't agree with the message. We'll get to that in a minute. But the important point is that this actually had some things going for it compared to John Wick. And if you listen to this podcast at all, you know I hate John Wick. John Wick sucks, dude. John Wick is a garbage film. Should not be. Anyways, we're going to move on because we've talked about that before. Unless you have anything else to go into, Avalon, do you want to give us a summary of The Crow?
So The Crow is about Eric, it's about Eric and a disturbed, broken individual who comes from he's clearly had a rough background where it's a lot of bad things have happened in his life, and he's in an institution for therapy, and this girl comes named Shelly, and he kind of like becomes attracted to her, and they kind of become attracted to each other. They start hanging out, and then someone comes to the facility who Shelly recognizes, and that sparks them escaping and starting a new life out in the world, and they're happy for a time until Shelly's past catches up to her, and she and Eric are killed in their apartment one day, and then at that point, Eric is brought to this like world of the dead's like / reality, this place, and he's given the choice to avenge Shelly and bring her back. So, and that's the gist of the story. But
and if you saw any commercials, you get the same kind of impression that it's like this is it's a revenge story, right?
Yeah, so, it is.
Yeah, that's what you expect us to get, and that is this film to a T, with stuff going on that develops it, makes it a little more nuanced. Obviously, there is a message. We'll get to that, as I said, but let's start it off, right, with the rating. What did you get based on the 9-point system that we use to review these films? Avalon, what was your review?
I gave it a 5.55.
Wow. See, no, that's
no. I was trying to be objective in my review, and I'll be honest, I was not a huge fan of this movie. Like when I was done with it, but I was also trying to be objective and give it like a good rate it based on what we saw, like based on what was shown. And and when I was done, my score is 5.55. So
and maybe I think it will be interesting maybe to have a discussion on themes later, because themes definitely were in this film, but they were not necessarily themes I agree with, themes that I like. But in regards to storytelling, that doesn't make the story any less of a compelling story, as long as the message they convey is cohesively and well told, regardless of whether I liked the message. So I think that might be interesting to discuss once we get there. But I was very close to you in regards to review. I gave it a 5.15. So, less than half a point away from each other is pretty close. And I do think that I'm on the same page, that I didn't personally enjoy this film, but there was a lot that they did that I could see other people really enjoying it, and I probably wasn't the target audience. And I think that goes back to the 9-point system, how well it's trying to convey, do they do things in this film well, and how did they do it well? So it's like right on the edge of, on an average story, is this something you would rewatch or wouldn't rewatch? I probably wouldn't personally rewatch it, but I could see other people wanting to rewatch this film. So, let's get into it. The opening. What did you think of that opening? The opening, you see there's the flashback with the kid and the horse is caught in barbed wire while his mom's inside. And then after that, you have Shelly introduced with her friend freaking out, right? Those are the two scenes that encompass the beginning of this film. What were your thoughts about introducing us to the main character and his love interest?
I'll admit the scene with the kid was a little odd to open the movie. I won't say it was bad, but it was just odd. I don't know. Like, it just was like a weird way to open it, to show this horse that really has very little bearing on the rest of the story. Except maybe like the fact that he couldn't save the horse's life. But I don't know. As far as the Shelly and her friend, like, that just helps to establish like what we're up against in this movie, more or less. Like, just shows us who Vincent Roeg, is that right, Roeg? Yeah, but like that's like whatever. We're showing who he is,
the bad guy.
Yeah, we're kind of giving it like shown who he is, like what are we dealing with in a certain level. And so when like the one girl, her Shelly's friend, gets captured, we're shown her interrogated, and then he uses his ability on her, which essentially forces her to commit suicide right in front of him, which is kind of a disturbing scene. But we're we're shown that, and then Shelly starts to get tailed by one of Vincent's men, but she gets herself caught by the police, kind of intentionally, and they arrest her, and in the process of that, she gets sent to the same institution that Eric is at. I think it was interesting, like the fact that she decided to intentionally get caught to escape was like I mean, it was kind of a smart move in a indirect way. I mean, not that anyone wants to get arrested, but it was also like, okay, if you know who Vincent Roeg is at this point, and you realize you have to choose between 2 points, the fact that she chooses possibly prison to escape is like, okay, I'm. It just kind of underlines the severity of what who Vincent Roeg is in this world.
Right. And part of that is the dark feel that you get from this film from the start, right? What really impressed me, I mean, I gave full points for the opener personally. I could see how you would say, oh, the horse isn't critical to the film, other than it's just like a really sad, somewhat dark experience that this kid had when he was a child. And then he becomes an adult, and he's carrying that with him in nightmares, right? So it's like, okay, the horse didn't significantly mean anything, I guess, symbolically, other than this kid had this very traumatic experience with it. They also indicate, I think, I don't know, when it comes to an opening scene, right? This was one of those scenes where I thought they did a lot of things right, right? They show you a kid who's desperately trying to save this horse. Why? Because he's in a desolate, middle of nowhere spot. And his mom and him are living in this trailer house, and his mom is lying on the couch on drugs or on alcohol or something, and she's totally passed out, disinterested, not engaged in the world at all. She's trying to escape. And he's there seeing this horse who's about to die, and all the crows are ready to eat it, right? Or I guess it was vultures. I don't know. I wasn't super aware. Anyways, regardless, the horse is dying, and he's got nothing else except for this horse, and he's just in total despair about it. So, and he's desperately trying to save it, and he can't because it's all cut up in barbed wire, and it's going to die. So it's a great opening scene in regards to showing just a traumatic experience for a child, and how that has shaped him going forward, about this desperate desire to not lose the things that he cares about. And how that's affected him in the past, and how he's hesitant, even in some degree, to build relationships or be engaged in the world going forward, which is one of the first things you see with Eric. So that was good. And Shelly's part also excellent, like you said. So I don't think I have anything to add there. I'm sure we'll talk more about her when we address her specifically, but going back to Eric's arc, you get that introductory scene, and then from there, you see him develop into this character that's at this rehabilitation center, and the story goes on from there. What were your thoughts on the character of Eric as they develop him?
Eric kind of got full points for me, only because he is a very broken individual, and that is very clearly stated. And he is someone who struggles with the pain and darkness of his past life. He is, as you said, very disinterested in the world. And then as the story progresses, when Shelly comes in, we see how she brings some light and some something positive to his life again. And so then we see him when they escape, they have this new life. And even though it's kind of skipped over a good section of their relationship, we're kind of shown things are progressing at a rapid rate, we see that his life gets better because of her. We see that he becomes starts to become a better person because of her. And so it makes it all the more dramatic and all the more painful when suddenly they're attacked and Shelly is killed later on.
Yeah, no, and they definitely, when you talk about his development going forward, because you're right on a lot of that. I would curious to see, because you see those concerns, right? You see those fears, and then you see some manifestation of those fears as he sees them being attacked by the people trailing Shelly. What was your thoughts on him? Because that really instigates him into the film, right? Now he's really involved, and he gets sent to the place of the crows, the place between life and death. What was your thoughts on that?
This is one of the few areas of the movie where I kind of was confused. And that's only because the whole land between the living and the dead is not clearly explained, maybe, as it could have been. I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit explained, but not clearly. And maybe the comics explain it better than this movie does, but I don't know.
Right.
It's just one of those things where it's almost some things are assumed and they should have been explained. but yeah, like he gets summoned over there, and he meets this character. I don't know if they've given him a name. Actually, the guide there.
I don't know
I
what
don't know
character you're talking about.
the guy who's in the land between the life and death, like the guy who
Oh, yeah,
explains the
they
crow
did.
powers.
They do give him a name. His name is Kronos. You never hear that in the film, though. So, why?
Yeah, no, they don't
why does he
explain.
have this name? I don't know.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Why?
I wouldn't know if I hadn't done research. Like, they did. That was not clear at all in the film.
That is weird. Okay. Oh yeah. That threw my brain for a loop for a moment. Okay. So, anyways, yeah, he gets sent to this place of the land between the land of the living and the dead, and we start to see how he's like, from there, he's given this ability. He's like chosen by the crows in a way to avenge the dead. Like he's goes to make right what was made wrong, and in a sense, he is chosen to get revenge for him and Shelly, and he's promised that if he gets revenge for them, Shelly can come back to life.
Right.
So, and that's kind of the impetus for getting him into this whole like fight and this whole conflict even further than he was before. And I'll just say, just from a certain perspective, I actually appreciated that part of it, because sometimes it's like, oh, just get revenge for the sake of revenge, like kill. But no, there's actually another motive for him just to killing people, and that he's promised someone he loves is going to come back to life if he gets rid of these people. Which is like, okay, from a certain storytelling perspective and from a motivation standpoint, that is actually excellent, because that's actually a very good driving force to get someone to do something as violent as what Eric does in this movie.
Right. And I think it's definitely interesting to see that in contrast to the background that were given for the comics originally. Now, the basics of the comics is more or less you're dealing with a gang of thugs who are interacting with this man and his girlfriend, and they kill her and they paralyze him, and then he goes off to the hospital and dies. And then the crow lands on his, I believe it's a crow lands on his gravestone, and then he comes back to life with these new powers, right? And he's on this mission to do these things with the power of the crows. In this retelling of the crow, you have a character who is not allowed to rest. He's not allowed to go to heaven or hell because he has unfinished business, right? And this is pulling off of other, I guess, ideas that you've seen either in various cultures in regards to the path of the dead and what that means. So it's not that there's this idea of whether that's purgatory or some other form of middle state that people have to figure things out and then go to one state or the other. That's more or less what you have here. And the idea, at least to start, is that you have the power to continually live because of this unfinished business of a restless soul. So it was definitely interesting in regards to a purpose and this idea that you need to bring some sort of balance, which is more of a, I guess, the yin-yang aspect of, oh, there's a very bad man out there, and you are the perfect candidate because you are already a restless soul. And this man is killing innocents for the sake of prolonging his own life. And that's the more or less the backstory for Vincent Roeg, the villain in this story, right? And that's the motive they give the crows and their not really leader, but like spokesperson, Kronos, gives to Eric is like, hey, you just died, but we'll give you life again, and you won't be able to die as long as you stick to your motive of love that was destroyed by these evil people and go off to destroy them in return to bring balance to the universe by killing this evil person who is killing good people for his own ends. So it's a interesting plotline analysis idea. I don't personally agree with it, but it's also like, well, it's an interesting idea to explore, and even though I disagree with it, let's just see how they play this out, right? That was kind of my thought process on that. I don't know if you have more to add on that area, because I do think the crow aspect is interesting, and it's critical for everything going forward.
Hmm. I mean, the only thing I'll say, yeah, no, you're right. That certain cultures and other things have different ideas of this. I mean, but I don't know why this comes to mind. But like, was that the plague mask or whatever? Like the whole, which I think that is a crow's head, where it's almost like the idea of death and like going on to the next life. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
And you see that develop more once he goes from there, because he goes off to kill his enemies in the name of justice, right? Bringing
Mm,
righteousness to the world by destroying these evil men and his minions. And the first thing they see when they see him is, oh, I killed you. And he goes, yeah, you did. And then he kills them in return, right? And he goes on this killing spree, slowly killing the enemies that have taken his love, until he comes to a situation where he realizes that his girlfriend was not completely innocent in everything that occurred, right? And we'll get to her in a minute, but he then doubts his relationship. He doubts the love that was driving him to commit these acts of vengeance and justice, quote unquote.
yeah.
What was your thoughts on that all developing in this film, and then how he responds and goes forward with that?
I mean, well, that actually brings up one of the points on the 9 point system for me, anyway. But that's the heightened tension, because one problem, I mean, as you said at the beginning, is like when you have a character who can't die or can't seem to die, you have the situation where it's like, what is at stake? And there's definitely this aspect of the movie where it's like, because he heals from everything. I mean, sure, he's in a lot of pain, he feels everything, but he heals from almost everything.
Right.
So
Right.
there's this idea where it's like, it's hard. Like the tension is there is some tension, but not a whole lot of tension in some of these scenes. It isn't until
Right.
he
The
doubts.
tension is from him resetting his own bone, not from him
Yeah.
thinking he's going to die, right?
Yeah, or he's going to fail. Like, because
Right.
there's not really a doubt that he's going to fail. The only time there's doubt he's going to fail is when he doubts the relationship, and then suddenly he's back in the land between the living and dead after he gets shot, and it's almost like he's not healing from the wound that like from the gunshot, and he's told that because he doubted, he's essentially already failed in his mission to rescue her.
Right.
And so
Right.
then it's almost like a sudden surprise. Oh, he could fail right now, and like he's going to fail. He's got to get sent on to the next life until he makes the deal, and then he gets sent back to finish the job.
No, 100%. I actually noted that myself, that like I said right off the bat, I was curious to see how they would make this story compelling. And as much as I still don't think they had the best narrative in regards to making the tension worse as the story progresses, they did very well with what they had. And in this specific instance, they did make you doubt, oh, maybe he might die, because he almost died then because he doubted the love that he had for his girlfriend when he realizes that she did a bad thing, right? And so that ends up actually materially affecting the plot and causing him to be actually able to die, versus previously he wasn't able to. And so then he makes a deal where they make things worse, right? They heighten the tension by saying, okay, previously, if I did this thing, both of us could live. Now, that's not the case. Well, how about this? I'll sacrifice myself, and then she gets to live, and I'll take her place if you let me complete the mission, even though I doubted everything. And that increases the tension. Right now, he's definitively going to lose something at the end of this film because of this deal he just made. And he makes it with Kronos and the Crows appear to agree. And so he goes back onto this killing spree, now with the full-blown makeup of, black and white and the stuff you probably would have seen if you watched the 1994 version of the film. What was your thoughts on his continued development from there up even until his experience with Vincent Roeg and the climax of the film?
It's essentially it's essentially the whole John Wick scenario. It's like a bunch of violence and gory mess as he's hunting down people and he's trying to go after Vincent Roeg. It's not until we meet Vincent Roeg that that things kind of come to a head in a, I don't want to say anticlimactic, but it almost felt anticlimactic in some ways. But
Huh.
and it was just because, and I think this kind of goes back to the whole setting a story world thing, because it's like they just assume a lot of things in this movie and don't do enough explaining about what is going on and what these people are capable of. Like, we know Vincent Roeg has this ability, but also in that same scene, he's hurt. Like, he cuts himself and he's bleeding, and it's like, okay, he's also a normal man. So he's not, like, physically able to do what the Eric can do. He's not. Right. He's not the Crow. Right. But at the same time, somehow he's able to leech onto the Crow's powers and start to take on the Crow's abilities, physical abilities. Like, that wasn't fully explained. It just kind of came out of nowhere. It's like, wait, when was he able to do this? Like, why? And I don't know. Like, I felt like more explanation was needed. And so, and not that it was bad. Like, the sequence of events in that scene wasn't bad. In fact, the whole discussion they have before that, I thought it kind of fit Vincent Roeg's character and what the conflict was telling up to this point. It kind of fit certain aspects of the conflict. But I feel like we needed more explanation of what was possible before that scene, because then it would have amped up the tension of that scene, and it would have added more conflict and like more like we had made us doubt the ending more or less. Like, especially if we thought he could take his powers. So it wasn't. Maybe it was said early on. I just
okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. I think there's a whole discussion that needs to be had on Vincent Roeg, so I'm going to have you recap that when we readdress that, because I do think that's a worthy discussion. I do think there's maybe some answers there, but I do think that that's a very fair critique, so stay tuned if you're listening. We're going to finish up with Eric and jump over to Shelly, though, and finish with him before we end this podcast. So I do think that that's a fair point. Do you think it's fair to address Shelly at this point? Because I think that's pretty much everything you get until the very end of the film. So Shelly's a key character to Eric's development as well.
We could actually just practically cover almost all the side characters besides Vincent in one swoop right now, because in my opinion of the side characters of this movie, only Shelly has any character development whatsoever. Like, everyone else is just stock cardboard cutouts who fill a role temporarily before they're either killed off or disappear from the scene or whatever the function is. Like, or they just deliver key information or whatever. I mean, it's just like Shelly. Now, Shelly does have some decent amount of character development. We get enough to understand who she is, where she comes from, and we kind of get an aspect of her, what she's afraid of too. And like, so we're given kind of a fully fledged character, and it makes sense. Some of the things she's like, her actions do make sense. But yeah, no, like, she's just someone who's running because she's afraid. Like, she has been traumatized by some things, and she's like almost afraid to, like, she has a hard time facing her fear and moving on. Like, when she tries to play the music the one time, then she like can't, because she remembers like the scene where we find out later she killed someone. And so it's just so she has struggles at the same time, but she also cares deeply about Eric too. So, and then like she seems about ready to tell him everything, and then she dies, and then she practically disappears from the movie because she has no role in it except as like a reminder until the end when she gets brought back to life. So,
which was what this whole film was for in Eric's mind to begin with. So, 100%. She plays well as her role, right? And I would say, I mean, my only very, very minor critique was that I think they spent an excessive amount of time in romance scenes that didn't actually develop their relationship anymore or make you more interested in them. But that's like a personal opinion. I don't know that is a huge deal breaker, right? So I was like, whatever. At the end of the day, she loves him, he loves her, and when she dies, it's heartbreaking for him and is a catalyst for everything going forward in his mind. So and then knowing the evil thing she did where she killed somebody by the powers of Vincent Roeg is part of a core element of this film and his motivations and what he chooses to do once he understands that information, right? So, yeah, her character was developed very well. She was compelling as a character. Um, every other person was either supporting the villain or supporting the protagonist in their goals in this film. Like that guy Dorm, who was the friend of Shelly's, says that thing about, "Oh, I saw you in the club, and the way that she looked at you was so much full of love that I knew there was something special about you." And you go, "Okay, what?" This guy is on the run and he's stopping to make this monologue to this guy he's never talked to in his life about how much this girl that's now dead used to love him. Like this is very questionable as a dialogue piece, to say the least. And so you have a couple of things like that regularly in this film, but specifically that's an example of how the side characters in this film were not developed. They existed for the plot, not the other way around, and that was just not great. So, Shelly was good, but other than that, eh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, Vincent, my boy, the villain of this film is Vincent, right? And he is this character who is, in regards to the comics, a very new addition, right? Because in the comics, you have more of this idea of a gang who is going around doing evil things, and then Eric comes to exact revenge on the gang. In this case, Vincent Roeg is a thespian, if you will. Not really actually a thespian. He's more of... Vincent Roeg is a man of culture, let's just say. And he likes to enjoy the fine things of life, but he's also lived for a very long time due to a deal he made with the devil, right? Yeah. And that is his introduction to this film, where he is now committing these evil things for the sake of his eternal existence. What was your thoughts on Vincent Roeg as a character? I know you said a little bit about the end, so if you want to recap that and also talk about your thoughts on him as a whole, that'd be amazing.
Okay, so Vincent Roeg, I mean, from a character standpoint, he's not a bad character, and he's actually an interesting character in some regards, just because he's like, you get this guy who's kind of detached himself from humanity in a certain way, whereas like he's been living for a while, and he's able to live forever, theoretically, if he just sacrifices those who are innocent, supposedly, and so he just gets them to kill them, like, sacrifices their souls so he can keep living. And he has this ability where it's like he can just whisper in their ears, and he brings out the darkness inside of them, and he can even get them to do whatever he wants, and usually it's to kill themselves. He gets people to kill themselves on a regular basis in this movie, just by whispering in their ear. And we're shown he enjoys riches, he enjoys the finer things of life. He has control over these people, this organization. But at the same time, he's also kind of afraid of it getting exposed. Like, he loves the image he's built up for himself, and he doesn't want that exposed in public. So, his fear, of course, is any rich person's fear of getting shamed or getting exposed in front of the world for something. So it's he's hunting down Shelly and her friend at the beginning of the movie because he's trying to get the video evidence so that they can't expose him. And they don't get that evidence, which prompts them to find Shelly and Eric later and kill them both. So, and throughout the movie, they're still looking for this phone that has the video evidence, and they can't seem to find it. So, I mean, Vincent's character makes sense from a standpoint. It's when his powers come involved that we're not really given a whole lot of explanation, and maybe it's we're shown a little bit. We're shown what his whispering does. In the one person, Don or whatever, he explains a little bit more what the power that does. Where it's he's bringing out the darkness of the individual and overcomes them and gets them to do whatever. But yeah, that's the only ability we're shown that Vincent has, aside from his eternal life.
Right.
But other than that, so it's the whole scene at the end, as I said, where it's he's leeching the powers of the crow off of Eric. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense because there's no explanation for that scene, for that preemptive, before that moment. So
sure, yeah. I don't think you're wrong.
And so I almost wish they had given them a little bit more time explaining that. And maybe it would have been good for this movie to do like a flashback scene at the very beginning of the movie, kind of showing Vincent getting his powers, maybe. Like, because we're showing he's centuries old. Like, maybe go back in time to when he started, or like preemptively show that or something. I don't know. And then we cut to and then later on, then we cut to the present, to Shelly and the others, and then we show him in the present day, and we're like, oh, so he's still around. Like, clearly the deal has worked out for him, kind of thing. So,
yeah, it's
so that way the audience at least understands what his abilities are and what he can do. And so, like, when later on things happen in the movie, we're not like confused. We're instead like made like the tension is amped up, and we're like, oh, like what's going to happen? Like, oh, is he going to succeed or not? Like, it adds doubt to the reader's minds. It gives them something to dread in the sequence of events.
I see what you're saying. I'm going to play the devil's advocate.
Okay.
Even though we were so similar in so many things, right? I'm going to play the devil's advocate here and say that I actually think that they should have done less in regards to revealing Vincent Roeg. Now, the reason I say that is, first off, when you see him at the beginning, they show him bringing the sacrificial knife, right? And bringing it to the friend of Shelly and speaking the words in her ear in a very creepy way that then she becomes possessed and takes the knife and kills herself. And that is the impetus of him being the villain in this film. And then he, cuts his own hand and mingles his blood with hers and seems to consume her power or something along those lines, right? Very dark scene, very creepy scene. In the middle of that scene, he has this discussion with her on this monologue of, I only kill good people. I don't kill bad people because if I kill good people, I take their ability to go to heaven and imbue it on myself. Rather than people who go to hell, I don't do that. And then moves on with his thing. And I was like, okay, watching this, who the heck says that? Like, no one, I don't care what scene or reality or whatever universe you're in, you're not going to have a monologue to this person to explain to them how your powers work. But that was there solely for the audience, right? So there's a couple of scenes like that where I saw Vincent Roeg, right, as an addition to this, the Crow universe, right? He's the new addition. He didn't exist in the original films. Is interesting, but the way they go about explaining, at least the method they go about explaining his powers was very much let me just monologue this to you real quick so that you as the audience know what is going on. And that was not an effective way of telling that story. So maybe that's more of where I'm coming from, is that several times in this film you get this impression of, we'll just tell you how this is working rather than doing this in a side compelling way that is actually organic for the film. So I don't deny that some of the powers could have been explained more clearly, and definitely at the end you get
your
that.
argument kind of supports what I said, because it's just like it would have shown rather than told what his abilities could do. Like, we would have been given a better way of explaining what his abilities are and why.
Sure. So I think most of that, other than the little key piece of information where he says, I don't send people who are going to hell, I don't target them. I only target good people going to heaven. When he says that, that's the only key piece of information in that monologue that we don't rehear when when Kronos is explaining to Eric, who is about to become this Crow vigilante, what the powers of the bad guy are. He explains to them, like, oh, there's this bad man that is bringing imbalance to the universe, and someone needs to stop him, and this is what he's doing, right? And he explains all of that except for that one key bit of information. You could have him explain that through the Crow, right, or Kronos, or any number of characters, or explain that later in the film. But even just adding an extra air of mystery, why is he killing people? How does he have this power, right? Showing all of that from the start, I think, would have made him actually a more compelling villain, rather than explaining all of that so we know how his powers work. And this is where me as a storyteller would generally err on the fact of telling less information because too much information can be confusing. That being said, or not
Well,
confusing,
I'm
it can
not
be.
arguing. I actually agree with your point on a certain level. Like, yes, less is more sometimes. But
Uh-huh.
the only reason I made that argument is
Mm-hmm.
because of the whole discrepancy in the power levels of Eric versus Vincent. Because based on what we
Sure.
know of Vincent and Eric, Eric is clearly the more powerful of the two. I mean, not Vincent. Eric seems to have more power over the two. Like, because we
Right.
don't know if Vincent, like, without knowing about the whole. I mean, essentially because we don't know about the whole, like, stealing his powers thing in that scene, we kind of get the impression that Eric has kind of got a clear shot to win, like to kill Vincent and get his girlfriend back. So, in my opinion, just
Interesting.
from a
Okay.
storytelling perspective, is that we need something to sow doubt in the audience's mind. Something that'll keep them on edge and make them think, maybe Eric won't win. Maybe Vincent can beat him. And that is what that's what the story needed in that moment, but we didn't get that.
That's an interesting take. I actually somewhat agree with that. Most of my concerns would probably lie in earlier in the film where you go, hey, you didn't heighten the tension well because he always wins, right? He's indestructible. He is an invincible being. And so, other than that one scene where he proves otherwise, for the most part, he can't die. And that is how he lives moving forward, is he does all these things because he is not afraid of death. So, yes, when you approach him, and it is interesting to think about that aspect where it's like, well, all of a sudden, Vincent Roeg has this power where he can actually kill Eric using the sacrificial knife, and everyone is like, oh my goodness, wasn't expecting that. So it is a good plot twist. I thought, in regards to plot twists, it got points for me because of that. But yeah, it would be like if you're not following very, very closely and post the film, even to some degree, going, okay, so how do they do this? How does this make sense? And trying to logically think it through, you wouldn't necessarily get all of those points and figure all of that out, if you will. Because I do think that in regards to the climax, I thought it was relatively cohesive if you spent enough time thinking about it. But I did have to think about it, right? It wasn't just right off the bat, oh, I was really concerned that Vincent was going to kill him, because you don't think that, because Eric is invincible, right? He can't be stopped. It's interesting. I don't know what the answer is, to be honest, on this one. I don't know what you would do specifically to reveal Vincent's power that he could actually kill Eric, or show some level of doubt in regards to Eric being able to stop Vincent. Because I also love, in my mind, the dynamic that, yeah, Vincent's the bad guy, but he has powers that are nowhere near the powers of Eric. And so Vincent versus Eric is an interesting showdown because one clearly is outmatched the other. But he has one trump card, and that's this little dagger that he just stabs into you, and then boom, he has your power. Boom, now you're dead, not him. So I liked how they played it out overall. Could they have done something earlier to show Vincent's power, or at least sow doubt that Vincent could kill Eric? Yes. What that looks like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I just was saying what I personally would have liked.
That's fair.
And I agree that the climax for the most part is very well put together, and most of it does make sense. I agree with that statement as well.
Well, so here's the thing, and maybe this will drive into the conclusion a little bit more, if it helps solidify everything for you. But like, they do two things very well in this climax. One, they show that thing where Vincent has this dagger, and he can take the powers of the crow, and he becomes the crow in some ways himself, right? And by doing that, he sends himself to this middle world, right? This world where the crows live, this world between living and dead. And that actually becomes his own undoing, as that is where he needed to be sentenced to death to begin with. So the very fact of him being able to come here ends up being the way that he gets defeated, because that is where he gets sentenced, and that is where he gets dragged into the depths of hell. So,
Mm.
in regards to a plot twist and surprising the audiences, I actually think they did very, very well in this film, having surprising aspects that they, if you had known or fully understood the elements of this film, you could have seen it coming, but most people probably would not.
Yeah.
And putting those all together in a cohesive way where all the locks click in place and then boom, this is the end. I was pretty impressed. This was the one part of the film that I was like, I really enjoyed it. I thought you did very well on this part. Kudos to you. But that was my impression, and I'm getting the impression that you thought something differently. So I'd love to hear how you got to that point.
I mean, I didn't think it was a plot twist per se that he gets sent to the world between the living and the dead. I mean, I'm not sure. Like as I said, that was
the plot twist that I saw was one that that he could steal his powers, right, using the dagger, and two, that he was that more or less it was the ironic ending that by being in the place of the dead, he got dragged down and faced his own judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's pretty clear that if you become the Crow, yeah, you obviously would be sent to the middle world.
No, as I said, I was just more confused by some of that, and I just wanted a better explanation in my head for why that was. Mm-hmm. I see where I could see why you thought those things.
Yeah,
I don't. Yeah, I think it's just an area we'll just agree to disagree kind of thing.
That's fair. Yeah,
but I think we both agree that we don't. This was not a movie made for either of us. Like this is not. We're not the target audience for this movie. Obviously,
right.
We're trying to analyze it from a story perspective, and I'm sure. I mean, obviously, it could be better, but clearly the Goths will probably love this movie, and the other people who love the dark, like superhero, like horror genre, those people will love this movie. Us, we're just like, okay, like we don't need more John Wick violence in our entertainment. That's what our thoughts are.
Yes.
So,
yeah. So, what was your thoughts on the conclusion of this film, the climax, and everything tapering down into the ending? What were your thoughts on that, on the lasting impact of this?
Yeah.
What did you think overall?
Well, I'll just briefly touch on, there's a lot of little things to cover on that, because obviously I did appreciate, as I said earlier, the him trading his life for Shelly's. Because that does, despite the themes and whatever's going on in this movie, that is a positive thing, like to be willing to lay your own life down for someone else. And and I was also appreciative of the fact the movie follows through on that, where it's like he actually does lay down his life and she does come back to life without him. So it's like it follows through Shelly, and Eric is still stuck in the land of the dead. Mm-hmm. So I, for one, appreciated that part of the ending. But as far as the whole like conflict of themes and everything else in this movie goes, one thing this movie does thematically, which bugs me, is the correlation between love and revenge. The movie keeps using the terms love as the motivation for Eric doing these things, and you understand why, but it's also essentially he's doing this in revenge, and it's very hateful, like anger you see he's using, like when he's like killing these people and everything. So the mix-up of anger and love in those scenes, from my perspective, that's not cohesive. It's not, doesn't make, and I personally don't like it.
It's a false equivalency, and they do it fairly well, but if you really stop and think about it for a second, you realize this isn't true love. This isn't what someone who loves someone does. They don't mercilessly just slaughter people and intentionally use a sword to slaughter people because they know it'll be more painful, right? Yeah. Or because it'll look cool. Like, you are right on that, but keep going.
Yeah, no, I mean, other than the correlation between revenge, like anger and love, it's just like the themes of this movie are fairly well put together. I got the impression the message of this movie is that revenge is justified when it's for those whom we love. that's kind of the takeaway of my message. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, it kind of follows through from the movie.
Uh-huh.
I don't agree with that message,
No.
but it's but yeah, no, but it is like, but the movie does bring back love. It brings back like all these things again and again in the movie. So it does you do see it as something they are intentionally building in the movie. So,
Right. Right.
so I guess from a storytelling perspective, I said they did a decent job, if not a pretty like above average, like way above average job for theme. But personally, I was not in favor of what they did. So
Right. No, and this is one of those situations where they do tell a theme overall pretty well, right? They have this idea of revenge and justice and love, and these are very strong themes in this film, right? They don't go too much beyond that, and that's intentional because they want to develop those very, very well. But yeah, what you end up getting out of that is that there's a sense in which you could kill anyone in the name of love and justice, right? That is righteous. And just looking at that on its face, you could say, no, that's 100% not okay. Someone who truly loves someone else is not going to go out of their way to massacre people, right? That doesn't make sense. And so I think that the idea that messages like this are being conveyed is in some ways disturbing. But
well, I mean,
you can't fault them for telling the story well. Right? You could fault them from like a moral perspective and say, oh, that's unethical. But like from a storytelling perspective, they do follow through on the message they're trying to convey, and they do that to the fullest extent.
Yeah. So, well, and what I was just going to say is like, if you are willing, and this is just kind of diverting from the movie a little bit and going to the whole like moral, philosophical idea of this, if you're willing to kill someone for the sake of love, like because they took someone whom you loved away from you, I would say that's not really love for the other person. You're doing, it's more of like a selfish love. Like they took something away from you, so you're going to take away something from them. So it's like, it's a self-love, if anything, not a true love for the other person. So, because if you truly wish to honor someone else after they died, I'm sure there are dozens of other ways of doing that to show that you cared and loved them. And killing their killers isn't necessarily the best way of doing that per se, unless like other factors are brought into the equation as well, but just generally.
Right. Well, even just thinking about what we saw in that film, right? You see he's saying, I'm doing this for love, but at the same time, he cuts off two people's heads and then walks into the middle of a stage and throws them out into the audience. Is that an act of love? No, that's disgusting, that's horrifying, and in some ways that's terrorizing the people who had nothing to do with this situation. And so...
there was literally no reason for that whole scene anyway. Like, for him to walk out on the stage and hold up the heads and throw them out. Like, there was no reason for him to do that. And, yeah.
Right. It was gratuitous satisfaction for his own part for having destroyed these evil people's lives. So, was he killing bad people? 100%, yeah. He gave justice to the people who did bad things. Should the vigilante be doing it, and should he be doing it in that way? Probably not, but that's, a whole discussion about vigilantes and all of that, so that's an aside. But the very message that's being conveyed is one that, I mean, I don't think that the anyone who thinks about it for 2 seconds would say they agree with. So, anyways, that's what you got from this film. Interesting idea, very well developed, very much not compelling in my mind as a theme, but they did it justice. So that's what you got.
And long story short, a movie not for us, but for other people.
Sure, 100%. So what are your thoughts on this film going forwards in regards to the impact of it? Obviously, this is a remake, so it's not that this story itself shouldn't be told, or the Crow story shouldn't be told.
Well, I feel like in this particular case, because of how many years have passed since the last Crow movie has come out, this is not really a question of lasting impact. More of a question, is this going to rejuvenate the franchise that is The Crow? Right. Because we've had 4 movies. This is the 5th movie after 20 years almost?
Right.
So is this going to jumpstart the series again and bring it back? I don't know. I think I haven't seen the original movies, and I'm not sure if I ever will. But based on what I've seen, and if the audience I'm suspecting it's pandering to loves it, maybe it will. Maybe another Crow movie will come out in a few years. And based on what I've seen about the other movies, it's probably going to be a new actor in the role of the Crow again. But I don't know. Well, so I guess it just depends on how well the target audience responds to this movie and how much they like it and like get other people to go see it. Because let's face it, I mean, as a moral movie, I don't know if it's going to survive very long on its own. Like, it almost needs, like, it would have to be like the franchise situation where another sequel comes out and keeps it going. So maybe it'll survive on its own. I mean, I'll be honest, it is better. Like, we just likened it to a superhero movie. So I guess in some ways it is better than some of the other superhero movies in some ways that have come out in the last few years. But this is also a horror, gothic superhero movie. So this is also not the same audience as those movies as well. So, I mean, not generally.
Very much so. Yes.
It has a higher chance of, like, standing the test of time than some of those movies do. But I'm not sure how much more, I don't know, like, how much more time it can survive past those ones. So.
Yeah. Well, I think my big takeaway from this film was definitely that trauma and grief are definitely topics of serious consideration for a lot of people.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, obviously.
Yes. How do you deal with a terrible thing happening in your life that you had nothing to do with? You didn't have any reason for it to occur to you, and yet it happens, right? This was the inspiration for this story to begin with, right? Terrible things happen to a man, and they never should have happened. And from there, he thinks about, from a base perspective, what would a different person who had powers do in this situation when they were tasked with the responsibility of seeking justice? So I think that it's definitely, in regards to how do you respond to trauma, it's definitely a topic that we have seen, we will continue to see. And this is not the first or last time we will see this, right? That topic specifically. In regards to the message that you see from this, it's very much a dark, vengeful response where you get John Wick plus I am righteous, right? Whereas, and to some degree, well, I don't know what the message of John Wick is because John Wick is crap. So I'm not going to attribute value to that film. But in this case, they're trying to attribute a righteousness to the evil that he's doing. And I think that that's just misplaced. So do I, from a moralistic viewpoint and a conscious viewpoint, do I think that people will resonate with this film? No. I think some people will. I think some people will want and wish for some sort of vengeful response to the evil in their life. Of course, that makes sense. Like, you're hurting and you want to see other people hurt in response. Is that the right response? Probably not. But, like, I understand where you come from by feeling that way. But honestly, I think that films in this genre that do better are ones that have the protagonist go and say, as much as I want to take revenge, it's not the right response, and I won't follow through on this, even though I desperately want to in this situation. So it's interesting. It's an interesting reboot. It's very interesting to see what they have done, where it came from, and what they will do going forward. Would I recommend this film? Definitely not. Partially because of personal experience with it and not enjoying it. Partially because, frankly, I don't think the themes in this film are compelling or valuable for people to hear. But it definitely was an interesting analysis, and it's interesting to see how they did some things like revelations and compelling motives for the characters well in this film. Yeah. And that's what we got. That's the pod.
Yeah, that's the pod.
We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back, as we always are, next week. Until next time, where we'll see you all then.